Welcome to another edition of Trib Talk. I'm interim editor Dave Noyce. Well, it's a sad day here at the Salt Lake Tribune. It is reporter Nate Carlisle's last day. He's leaving us to become an investigative producer at our content sharing partner, Fox 13. Nate has had an amazing 15-year run at the Trib, covering some of the paper's biggest stories during that stretch. So we thought it would be interesting to hear some of his reflections on his work here. If you have a question for Nate, just write them on our Facebook feed or tweet us at hashtag Trib Talk. You can also send an email to tribtalk@sltrib.com. Now, Nate, by your last day, I meant your last day here at the paper, of course, not your last day forever. So, but tell me, Nate, what emotions are you feeling today, if any? What's going through your mind? Besides that daily you need to finish or whatever.
Yeah, I am thinking about all the things I got to get done today in true daily journalism format. But like you said, Dave, a bittersweet day. It's tempered by the fact that I'm going somewhere that I'll still get to work with the Tribune folks on a semi-regular basis. I see that as a fringe benefit of moving over to Fox 13. A lot of good memories here. I got to do a lot of things I would not have gotten to do anywhere else on the planet, starting with polygamy, starting with a firing squad execution. And you can go down the list about things that I got to do in Utah that I wouldn't have gotten to do anywhere else. I actually got to ski on some assignments. I mean, where else can you do that, right?
Can't do that many places. Yeah.
The other thing I don't think people realize is that the Salt Lake Tribune is one of the last true statewide newspapers. Most of the newspapers in this country now, the ones that still exist, are focused on one city or one county or maybe one region. And the Salt Lake Tribune will go all the way down to the Four Corners north up to the Idaho-Nevada lines, man. And that makes for a lot of great stories and a lot of important journalism.
So, Nate, we'll touch on some of those things, but tell our listeners and viewers a little bit, brief about your background, like where you're from, where you went to school, and how you ended up at the Tribune.
Yeah, so I'm a Midwesterner. I grew up in Illinois and then went to the University of Missouri. And my parents were Western enthusiasts, and I think some of my family's watching, so I'll do the hi mom, hi grandma, I think too is probably watching, and my brothers and some of the rest of my family, and my wife is watching, I think, and talk about her in a moment. My parents were Western enthusiasts. We took a couple trips out west when I was growing up, and I think some of that rubbed off. My dad worked on a dude ranch in Wyoming for a few years when he was a young man. I think some of that rubbed off on me, and after I graduated college, I worked in Missouri for 3 years, and then was looking around for another job, like a lot of journalists that age. And Salt Lake Tribune is one of the places I applied. And as I recall, my first interview was with you and John Cahey, Dave, for would have been the Utah County reporter job. I didn't get it, I should add. But just a couple weeks later, there was an opening here on the crime desk at the Salt Lake Tribune. And an editor here at the time, Brett Israelson, gave me a phone interview. And then I came out a week or so later and met with him and Sheila McCann, who's now one of the managing editors of the paper, and got hired. And that was start of April 2005. And I started here April 18, 2005.
Wow. To be clear, we did not overlook you. We were holding out for something better for you. Okay. So that's what we did. So, Nate, go back now. Do you remember what your first significant assignment was at the paper?
Yes. It was, like I said, it was like mid to late April. And so they sent me into Summit County where sheriff's deputies were finding body parts along a outer road along Interstate 80. And so I get sent out. I have a distinct memory of going over Parley Summit, and it was relatively moderate temperatures and weather conditions on the east side of the summit. And then I get over into like the Summit County side, and I get hit with this snow that's hitting my windshield all of a sudden. And that was my first taste of Utah weather. And for a Midwesterner that didn't know anything about like elevation changes, it was an eye-opening experience about how the weather can change just depending on literally where you stand in the state of Utah.
You referenced witnessing a firing squad execution. It was the one of Ronnie Lee Gardner, which was the last execution in the state.
Yeah, might be the last one ever, the way it's going.
and you were a witness, and you wrote a firsthand account of this too. And I'd like to just read the very start of the firsthand account. It's a very, very, very good what newspaper reporters would call lead. Ronnie Lee Gardner's head, covered by a black hood, remained upright. His body sat straight in the chair to which he was strapped. As my eyes traveled down Gardner's left arm past his dark blue jumpsuit, I saw his pale white skin appear below his elbow. Half a faded blue tattoo, some kind of diamond shape, stuck out from the restraint under his wrist. At the bottom of his restraint, I focused on his fist. Gardner died much the way he lived, with a clenched fist. Do you remember that day? And what do you remember about it? Tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Well, really, it was 2 days. I mean, the execution was shortly after midnight, so the first minutes really of June 10. And so, really, you're talking about working June 9 and June 10. This would be 2010. And so I got ready for it kind of the way some professional athletes will get ready for a sporting event. I was thinking about how it might go. I was kind of imagining how it might play out. I read up a little bit on some writing techniques that I wanted to incorporate into whatever I wrote. And I didn't know exactly what I wrote. I don't remember writing anything in advance of the execution. I remember thinking about what might happen, but I didn't actually put any words to paper or to screen until afterwards. And so, I slept in on June 9 because I knew it was going to be a long day and night. And I was in the Tribune for a few hours, early to mid-evening. Of course, that time of night, it was still a lot of activity. The copy desk was here. The night reporter was here covering whatever else was going on in the state. And then about 7, 8 o'clock, I think it was, I had to get over to the prison because there was a process to get into the prison. And, they ran us through security and all that. And then, eventually we're led into a waiting room. And then at some point, and I was one of, what was it, like 8 or 10?
I think it was 8, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And all of us journalists were led into a side room adjacent to the execution chamber. And, really was like a screen pulled back all of a sudden, and we can see through the plexiglass Ronnie Lee Gardner strapped in the chair.
Can I ask, did you want to do this, or were you assigned, or did you feel compelled? What were your personal things about
compelled that? Would be accurate. Yeah. I mean, it was, I knew it would be historic, and I kind of took the attitude as like, well, did I get into journalism to cover important things or didn't I? And, so I volunteered with our managing editor at the time, Terry Orm. And to my knowledge, no one else volunteered. If anyone else, I mean, there was no tryout process. If anyone else volunteered,
Nate's willing, right?
Yeah,
okay,
I think that was it. Yeah, and so I got the job, and Terry did talk about it with me, and made sure I knew what I was getting into, because there'd been previous executions the newspaper had covered, and there'd been other journalists in the newsroom at the time who covered some of the lethal injection executions we'd had in the years prior. And so they kind of gave me a taste of what I could expect and the aftermath. And I did go, I actually visited a counselor before and after to kind of talk about some of the anxieties I had going into it, and then kind of debrief afterwards. And that was very beneficial. I was kind of a counseling agnostic before that. Now I'm a big proponent of it for people that need to talk through any issue. And I'm very proud of actually that first person account. I think that's far and away the best thing I've written, not just at the Tribune, but in my career. If I had to, just hand out one thing I've written, that'd be it, that first person account.
I mean, a big part of the story was he was going to be executed by firing squad, which, and so you knew you had to capture that a little bit too, right?
Yeah, I mean, almost by definition. Well, I think I actually state this in the piece. By definition, firing 4 bullets into someone's chest is a violent death, and so it's different than even the lethal injections and some of the other means we've executed people in Utah before, and it's. There's been no firing squad since anywhere in this country, and it might be the last. And I felt I had to capture that bit of history.
You also covered good chunks of the Susan Powell case. Tell us about your reflections on that, and maybe some moments that you remember most vividly on that kind of horrific case. Well, it is a horrific case.
Well, it is a horrific case, and it changed some ways I do things. I mean, for starters, I was always trained that you never interrupt the interview subject. You ask them a question, and then you let them talk and and let them expound and that. And I learned pretty quickly talking to Josh and Steve Powell that wasn't going to work. I learned I had, because they'd talk, but it wasn't about anything of any consequence, or they just recycle the same thing about how supposedly Susan's parents were out to get them. And so I learned some different interviewing techniques, kind of how to steer them back on topic, and also I think I know now how dangerous words can be. There was a lot of people I don't think anybody understood what they were dealing with, especially with Josh. I think, and even Chuck Cox told me once that he thought, assuming Josh, of course,
Cox would be Susan's father.
Sorry, yes. Mm-hmm. Chuck Cox is Susan's father, and even he thought it was a leap when Josh, killed the boys. He didn't, I don't think, quite foresaw all of that, and so I've thought a lot about that, and just how no one really understood what they were dealing with particularly Josh, and it was definitely something I'm always going to remember. And I've also, I teach now an investigative reporting course at the University of Utah, and I talk in there a little bit about how I got Josh and Steve to visit with me at all. That when I sat down with them in November 2010, or was 2011? Yeah, it'd be 2010. They weren't talking to any journalist at that time, but I kind of persuaded them to visit with me, in part because I was able to demonstrate I'd hear them out and be fair with them. And I talk about that now with some of my classes when we get into 2 units on source building and building rapport with sources.
Was that the taco night you refer to sometimes?
Taco night came a night or two after I first visited with them.
Tell just a little bit about that and why you call it that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was dubbed Taco Night at the time.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
It was just after I got up to Washington, photographer Rick Egan and I got up to Washington State to try to talk to the Powell family. They agreed, and we had one meeting the night before that began at a library in Puyallup, Washington. And then when the library closed, we actually went back to the motel where Rick and I were staying, and we visited for another 3 or 4 hours down in the conference room at the motel. And then they were willing to still talk, after we broke up at like 2 a.m. So Rick and I that night went over to the Powell house for dinner, and they happened to be having tacos. And so that's kind of why I dub it Taco Night at the Powell house, and we visited some more there. And it was I've had a lot of people ask me if in that house I see signs the boys were mistreated or what was to come or something, and the honest answer is no. The house was certainly kind of chaotic, but there was 2 small children in the house and then 3 adults too. So to the extent it was messy and stuff like that, probably not any more so than the average house with children of that age and things like that.
Yeah. Let me jump to another area of your coverage that became a big part of your coverage in the last several years. You've made yourself into one of the nation's leading experts on polygamy. What were some of the memorable stories you have from that, shall we say, sort of unorthodox or orthodox world, depending on how you define it? I mean, you have everything from the exodus from Short Creek, the Washakie pleas and the trials, teen brides, suicides, a whole gamut. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I first got to the Tribune in 2005, the polygamy beat was basically a crime beat. Warren Jeffs was on the run. The Utah and Arizona were trying to kick the cops out of Hilldale and Colorado City. And that's actually kind of how I got into covering polygamy. We had a polygamy reporter at the time, Brooke Adams, who there was so much going on. She was too busy. So she handed me the portfolio of what was going on with the police down in Hilldale and Colorado City. And in taking that, I got to know some folks in Short Creek. And then, we had some layoffs and people leave the Tribune. And so by 2014 or so, I was kind of the last person in the newsroom that knew much about what was going on in Short Creek. And through that, I went up learning more about the other groups in Utah too, polygamous groups, I should say. And the timing was kind of fortunate in that, especially Short Creek was transitioning out of that really insular community it was in the years prior. So many people left Warren Jeff's church and they were willing to speak. And so, I got the benefit of meeting a lot of people who were willing to talk that weren't willing to talk just a year earlier. And so Polygamy Beat kind of transitioned from being a kind of a crime beat into being covering almost like what sometimes in journalism we call undercover communities. I got into some of the culture and politics in the towns and some of the things that affect them. One of the things I'm most proud of that I wrote at the Tribune was a story about suicides among former FLDS members. And I think that's an example where, I explained some of the culture of the community and some of what had gone on there, and wrote an article that I think will benefit people and prevent more early deaths is what my hope is. And I got to learn something about some of the other fundamentalist communities too. And that helped me when, the few times here the legislature decided to change the bigamy laws in both directions. Once, when they increased the penalties for bigamy, and then later when they softened them to what they are now. Making all those contacts in the fundamentalist and polygamous communities was really an asset.
Now, this coverage took you to, we'll talk about Mexico in a bit, but Canada, Missouri, even back to your old stomping grounds.
Yeah.
But obviously down to Short Creek, Hilldale, Colorado City, those two border towns. And you often went with a photographer, Trent Nelson, quite frequently. Were you known in town by then at some point? And how were you treated? Were you followed? Those kinds of things? What happened?
I only know that I was ever followed once, and it wasn't actually in Short Creek. It was over in St. George, and I wrote a little something about that. I came out of my motel room one morning or afternoon, maybe it was afternoon in St. George, and there was a lady in a prairie dress, as the FLDS tend to wear, with a big camera, like as good as the ones we have here at the Tribune, taking photographs of me off a balcony. I'm not aware that I ever was followed in Short Creek, though we found out later that they had so many, at one point the FLDS had so many cameras set up around town, they didn't need to send anyone in a truck to follow you.
They knew where you were anyway.
But
right?
Yeah, they knew where we were just by watching the cameras. But anyway, I was, I think I've gotten to be known a little bit down there by a lot of folks, and a lot of folks recognize me when I come in town. They recognize Trent a lot more. They love Trent Nelson down there because he was the guy that was photographing so many folks in all those years where people were being evicted from families. I've heard multiple people tell Trent that the photos that Trent took that ran in the paper of their families were the only photos they had of their families after they were evicted. We ought to be talking about all the photographers, Salt Lake Tribune photographers in this. They were all great partners in all the assignments I went on. We talked about Rick Egan going with me up to Washington State, Trent Nelson going down with me to Short Creek, and a bunch of other polygamy assignments. Leah Hogston was with me on that first assignment I talked about over in Summit County, where the sheriff's deputies were finding the body parts, and all kinds of other stuff. Francisco Colothi was with me here just last weekend when we were covering one of the protests about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat, and they were with me on countless assignments, and they were always great partners. They would spot things I didn't see, and that would help my reporting, and they'd help me fetch names, and they were good conversation on a lot of drives. A lot of driving down to Short Creek and back, wherever else we're going, and they were great partners. Their editor, or these director of photography, is entitled Jeremy Harmon, does a great job to helping collaborate and figure out how to illustrate these stories, and we're talking about things I've written, but they all made the stuff I wrote better.
Yeah, they're all journalists too. So
yes.
Now let's talk about going to Sonora State, La Mora, Mexico, when you covered the aftermath of the ambush of those women and children who were gunned down by drug cartel. That was a difficult story just to cover, just because of what happened, but also because of where it was and getting in and finding a place to stay and covering it. What were the logistics like trying to figure that out?
Well, they were all figured out on the fly. Just to go to Arizona was kind of decided suddenly. And let's remind everybody, the killings were in Mexico, but the families had all kinds of Utah connections.
Correct.
And so that's why we consider it really a local story. Our editor at the time, Jennifer Napier Pierce, kind of just came out of the afternoon editors meeting and told me and Trent to go on to Arizona. So we flew into Tucson, and then we kind of had to figure out what to do next. This wasn't terribly well thought out. We drove down to kind of where we knew where the hospital was, and then we'd heard, and this is where me having connections in the fundamentalist community here, polygamist community here in Utah, paid off, because I'd heard that a caravan was going to leave from Douglas, Arizona, and drive across Sonora into La Mora, and for those of you that don't know, you can't just go to the local enterprise and rent a compact car and drive it into Mexico. You got to do all the special things to rent a car to take you to Mexico. But then we weren't driving on good paved roads down there either. It was 5 hours of bumpy washboard dirt roads to get you into La Mora. So you'd have you
didn't know, right, when you got to the border for sure whether you would actually go into Mexico, because you were concerned, your families were concerned, and I know the paper, we were concerned that you would be that your safety could be insured.
So there were a couple issues. Safety was the first and foremost. If we did go into Mexico, what guarantees did we have of safety? As it turned out, the Mexican military escorted the caravan all the way to La Mora, so that was pretty darn safe. The other issue is, what vehicle are we going to drive? And luckily, we made some inroads with the family and explained who we were, and one couple with a 4-door pickup truck agreed to give Trent and I a ride. And we should say also that the family wanted press there. They wanted journalists there. They wanted the world to see what had happened to these 10 people, mothers and children. And that made things easier. Some of the other news outlets that were there, including the Washington Post, New York Times, Associated Press, they already had correspondents in Mexico. They were able to send up. And so they had an easier time. It was us based in the U.S. here that had to figure out how we were going to get in and out of Mexico. Getting out was kind of a trick too. The caravan left the day after the funerals, and right up to the last couple of minutes before that caravan left, we weren't sure who was going to give us a ride. And finally, a brother of one of the victims and his wife, again with a 4-door pickup truck, gave Trent and I a ride up to I'm going to forget the name of this town. I forget the name of the town, but from there, Trent and I took a bus across Chihuahua and Sonora to get back to Agua Prieta, which is just across the line from Douglas, Arizona. And Trent and I actually walked back across the border and then walked another mile to the Walmart, which was the rally point that we'd left from a day earlier. And luckily,
where you had left your rental car,
right? We had left the rental car.
It was still there.
It was still there. And that was another question. Was our rental car still going to be there when we got back? Because we'd heard that the Walmart towed. and we thought, boy, this will be a fun conversation with the bosses back in Salt Lake City. If we get to the Walmart and our rental car is not there.
Yeah. So of late you've been covering the coronavirus. Tell us about your coverage and what you hoped to bring to it.
Yeah, I'll go back to, when I was taught in journalism school, they kind of beat into us that we had to get, quote unquote, real people in our stories. And I thought, what a better time to get such people into the newspaper than during this pandemic that's, making people sick and killing people. And so that's kind of the focus I took on during the pandemic. Another reporter here, a great reporter here, Sean Means, and I been making sure to look through obituaries, finding obituaries that talk about people dying of the coronavirus. And we've actually got a spreadsheet going of those names. And we put some other feelers out there too to find victims. And we're calling those families to ask more about how they got sick. Did they get sick in a nursing home? Did they get sick in a workplace? Did they just get a infection from a social outing or stuff like that? And telling those stories. Another story I wanted to tell is about workers who either get sick or fear getting sick on the job, and what's happening to them. There's not a lot of protections for workers in this pandemic. In fact, Utah actually passed a law that makes it harder for workers to sue if they do get infected on the job, if they can even prove they got infected on the job. And I wanted to tell those stories and explain all that to readers.
Mm-hmm. So it has been interesting because there's a researcher in town, Artis Parshall, who has been gathering stories of people who died from 1920. And the obits at that time often mentioned that that's what they died of. That hasn't necessarily been the case this time around. And of course, you're interested in making these people who die more than just a number on a tally sheet. You want to tell their stories. Has that been frustrating for you? I know we've been trying to gather that information.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, some families, in fact, most families aren't reporting in the obituary that COVID-19 was a cause or a factor in the death for whatever reason. But then also, if I do find a family that had that happen to them, they don't necessarily want to talk about it. And sometimes it's because, the death is too tender and they're not ready to discuss it yet. Other times I think they're worried about getting wrapped up into politics of the pandemic. Well, we all know, we've seen what's going on with masks, how that, just whether you wear a mask has become a political statement. I think some of these families just they don't want to be part of that discussion, and so they don't talk about what killed their loved one.
Yeah. So let's move a little bit to the future. What will you be doing at Fox 13?
What we've discussed is they're starting an investigative unit. The Fox affiliate here in Salt Lake City is owned by a company called Scripps that has an excellent reputation for journalism. It's actually an old newspaper company that now focuses on televisions. They own stations all across the country. You've probably watched Scripps stations in other markets and you didn't even know it. They own ABC stations, NBC, CBS, Telemundo stations, etc. They happen to own the Fox affiliate here in town. They're starting an investigative unit, Fox 13. I'm supposed to be a producer. The reporter is going to be Adam Herberts, who's been freelancing for them for a while and previously worked in Las Vegas. He'll be on camera. I'll be behind camera. I'll be doing a lot of the same things I did at the Tribune. I'll be, sending records requests. I'll be finding people to interview. I'll be, coming up with the story ideas themselves. I'll be finding data that covers the topic, that sort of thing. And I will be doing some writing. I'll be writing some scripts for Adam to read and some of what will go on the website as well.
Yeah. So, Nate, a quick thing. What will you miss about the Trib?
Well, I'm going to miss all my coworkers, and I know I'm not saying goodbye. There's actually a couple of them here in the newsroom today, which surprised
They're there to
me.
collect money you owe them, Nate.
That's probably right.
Just kidding. So.
I'm going to miss working with these folks. I'm glad I'm not moving, I'm glad I got to work with them all. The Tribune's changed my life. I met my wife Brooke here at a concert one night, and then I had to run off to go cover a story after I got a phone call from Terry telling me to go do something. Luckily, I followed up with her, and we've been married. We just had our 8th wedding anniversary here a couple weeks
Congratulations.
ago. Thank you. Robert Kirby, the columnist, performed the ceremony, and Pat Bagley drew our faces that went on a koozie that we handed out to all the wedding guests. So
I guess it counted if Kirby did it, but
that's right. And so that's a little taste of how the Tribune's impacted my life.
Yeah. No. So Nate, tell us, because I know it's my favorite headline too. What's your favorite headline in the Tribune?
Well, my favorite edition of the Tribune's the day after the Cubs won the World Series, and I find I know we don't run a lot of sports championships on the front page, out of town championships, so to speak, but we ran this one, and thank goodness.
You know why, right?
Well, I assume you were in charge that night.
Yeah. So,
I packed it up already. I should have kept it handy, but yeah, it's of pitcher Carl Edwards, who pitched in that 9th or 10th inning, I guess it was.
Yeah, 10th inning.
Running around with the Cubs W flag. So I'm glad I kept. That's probably the only edition of the Salt Lake Tribune I've kept. I didn't actually have a story in that day.
Nate and I are diehard Cubs fans, and that's the only kind that there are, frankly, if you're a Cubs fan. We're actually missing the Cubs playoff game right now to show how committed we are to our jobs. It's tied 0-0 going into the top of the 5th. So, well, Nate, we'll miss you.
Thank you, Dave. I'll miss you too, and thanks again for everything these 15 years.
And of course, we hope to be partnering with you on future projects. And we just wish you the best, truly, sincerely. Okay, and keep up the great journalism. All right.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks to all the readers. Hey, I gotta buy a subscription to the Salt Lake Tribune next week, folks, and I don't get it for free anymore. So you should be doing the same thing.
That's right. And to our listeners, please stay safe, and we'll see you again next time on Trib Talk.